So I'm giving you a bonus video this week and probably next week too. I am going to read you a short story of mine. A few of you may have read this, but a lot of you haven't heard of it. And it's not based in any series, but I thought I would just divide it into two parts and read it to you over the next couple weeks as just a little bonus, a thank you to my readers, and I hope you enjoy it. If you haven't subscribed to my channel by now, please do so, and hold on here and hit that bell to receive notifications if you want to get advised of new videos I have out. And give this video a pause up if you like it, because that helps my algorithms. And we'll get started here in just a moment. So the name of this story is Willowborn. I wrote it many years ago, and it was inspired not by any of Ray Bradbury's stories, but by his visionary nature. He is one of my biggest inspirations, and I will be forever grateful to his work because it taught me that prose can sing, that words can make music. So without much ado, I'm going to read you the first half of the story, and we'll finish the rest of it next week. Willowborn by Yasmine Galenorn. Born out of nowhere, the devil wind was, and it rustled through town, scouring backyards and into the sewers, where it frightened the rats and sent them into the streets. It shimmied through the water system and rattled the pipes so loud during the night that when Bethany Ann woke up to get a glass of water, the wind poured right out of the faucet and through her house. The noise sent her flying into her parents' room, where she woke them out of their dreams. They followed her into the kitchen to listen to the roaring, rushing force set free from the taps. Bethany Ann and her folks sat up all night listening to the wind. It pounded the walls and shook the glasses in the pecan china hutch, and Great-Grandma's rocker squeaked back and forth in the corner, even though no one had sat in it for 20 years. Come early dawn, 2 steps before morning and a hop after midnight, the devil's wind gathered for one final push. It raged from one side of the town to the other, sweeping through locked doors, oozing under windows, a wall of wind that left broken glass and popped eardrums in its wake. And then it was gone. People edged out onto their porches and extended their arms in the now still air, trying to figure out what had happened, but the silence weighed heavy. The devil's wind had brought a hunter to town, a shadow panther racing through the village. Mary saw it first and hid behind her mother's knees, but the panther passed by her house. Next came Timothy's house, but it passed by him too, and he was safe. And Heather, and on the shadow went, hunting for its prey. As it streaked by their homes, the inhabitants of Painter's Peak breathed a sigh of relief, not even understanding why they felt like they'd just escaped some sort of tragedy. But then the panther came to Bethany Ann's house. The shadow cat climbed the steps, a silhouette against the approaching dawn, and with its front claws scratched a deep mark on her door. Then, turning tail, it leapt off the porch and vanished. The town returned to bed, and Bethany Ann dreamed of the wind and what it might be whispering to her. Over the top of Painter's Peak the sun was rising. Dew still lingered, beading on the grass, as the sky glittered an amber-tinged blue that stretched 100 miles beyond the mountain village. Things got back to normal after that. A group of men rode out towards Bucola in Sammy D's pickup to see if the folks had noticed anything strange there, but the police laughed them out of town and said the whole damn village of Painter's Peak must have been stone drunk the night before. So the men returned with newspapers from all around, and they poured through them front to back, but there was no mention of the devil's wind. A few days later, Bethany Ann was sitting on her porch when Joseph ran over and grabbed her by the arm. He hustled her around back, excited and out of breath. As he flopped on the grass and she joined him, the breeze picked up their scent. She smelled like wildflowers and honey. "What do you want, Joey?" She smiled, her eyes twinkling. "I told you my name is Joseph." Suddenly shy, he stared at his feet. Maybe this wasn't a good idea. He was 14 now. But Bethany Ann still treated him like he was 10. At first he hadn't cared, but somewhere over the summer, Bethany Ann's opinion had begun to matter. "Your mother calls you Joseph." She laughed and leaned back against the grass, taking her hair out under the warmth of the sun. Joseph wanted nothing so much as to lay down beside her and press his nose to her hair, to breathe in her perfume so deep that he'd never forget it. "Knock it off, or I won't tell you my secret." As she quieted down, he added, "It's a doozy, too." "Secret? What secret?" Bethany Ann prodded his ribs with her finger. "You know I love secrets. Tell me." Relaxing, Joe smiled and motioned for her to sit up. It was hard to focus when she was laying there, sprawled out on the ground. He began a soft, low whistling. "I don't know whether I should tell you or not. You made fun of my name, and a man's name is his pride." "Please, I'm sorry." Bethany tugged on his sleeve. When he didn't respond, she frowned. "You came over here fast enough, so what's the big deal?" Joe grinned. "Do you really want to know? What's it worth to you?" Bethany sighed. "What do you want? I don't have any money." "Well," Joe's voice cracked, and he suddenly felt quite shy. It was now or never. Praying she wouldn't slap him, he said, You could give me a kiss." As he blurted out the last word, his pulse began to race, and he felt clammy and sweaty. She'd probably smack him, but then she'd been acting odd all summer. He gazed at her, looking her up and down. She was beautiful, with hair that shimmered red under the sun, and small, tight breasts and curving hips. Bethany Ann was growing up. She wasn't a little girl anymore. He held his breath and watched her through half-lidded eyes. She stared at him. "What did you say?" "You heard me." He tried to sound casual, but his voice quivered, and he bit his lip raw. He waited for her to laugh at him. Bethany regarded him carefully. "You mean it, don't you?" "Well, I wouldn't have said it if I didn't." Now Joe regretted ever saying anything, and he started to get up, but Bethany Ann rested a light hand on his shoulder. "The secret better be a good one," she whispered. As her lips brushed his, he took her in his arms. She was warm and smelled like wildflowers. Feelings rose up, warring within him. He wanted her, bad. He wanted to take her here, and yet he wanted to protect her. But more than anything, he wanted that kiss to continue. After a moment, she pulled away, blushing. "Now tell me your secret, if there really is one." "Oh, there's a secret, all right. It's out in the meadow. I thought I found it this morning. I think the devil's wind caused it." "The meadow? You went up to the meadow?" Bethany stared at him with wide eyes. "Weren't you scared?" Joe shrugged. "Nobody goes up there much. I like the quiet. Anyway, this place is hidden. If I hadn't been looking for Indian paintbrush, I would never have found it." "But the meadow," Bethany murmured. Riva, an old witch woman, had lived in the meadow long ago. Her house had burned down one night, and they never found her body. It was rumored that she disappeared into the woods surrounding the lake, and that her spirit still lived there still. "Promise me that you won't tell. It'll be our secret. Just ours." Joe waited until she nodded. "It's a willow tree." "A willow? So what? There are willows all up and down the streets of Painter's Peak. A willow? Bethany shook her head and began to laugh. I think you've been out in the sun too long. Joe frowned. Damn it, it's not worth telling girls anything. Do you think I'd come rushing over here to tell you that just any ordinary willow was growing in the meadow? I'm not stupid, no matter what you think. Bethany bit back her laughter. I'm sorry. What's so different about it? I think you'd better come see. Can you go now? Bethany shook her head. After dinner, Mom needs me to help her with the beans. I'll meet you at 7 by the school, okay? Okay. More pants. It's thorny out there. And haunted, Bethany whispered. Before they left their long-time hiding place, Bethany Ann managed to plant another kiss on Joe's lips. Then, cheeks flaming, she disappeared into her house. Joe followed more slowly. His hand lightly caressed the skin she had touched. Her smell still lingered around him, and he walked home so preoccupied with the new, emerging feelings that he didn't notice the change in the air. The wind was rising. The meadow had just been called the Meadow for so many years that nobody remembered who named it that. The land surrounding it was grassy, with small clumps of flowers dotting the sea of green. Partway up the slope of Painter's Peak, a grove of trees crowded thickly together. A stream flowed down from the top of the mountain, through the woods, where it meandered along until it hit the gully by the village. Bethany and Joe followed the dusty path up the slope. As the sun lowered in the sky, the birds began their evensong. The cooling sunlight hit Bethany's hair and transformed the auburn tangles into red tongues of flame cascading down her back. Joe stared at her. She seemed so different than last year. Or was it simply that she had kissed him? Whatever the case, he shook his head and led the way off the trail, under the canopy of trees. The light filtered through the branches and created shadow play on the forest floor. Most of the village refused to come here. Riva had planted the grove and watched over the village, but when her house burned, it was whispered that Jenkins' mean old great-grandpa had been the cause of it. His family had been in trouble of one form or another ever since. Nobody ever found Riva's body, although there was some question of how hard the searchers had actually tried. Parts of her house still remained, even a century later, and superstition kept her memory alive. Bethany shivered as the temperature dropped. It was cooler in the woods than on the slopes. Do you think it's true that Riva planted the trees? Joe pushed his hands in his back pockets and squinted. I think so. I wish I could have met her. Bethany stared at him as if he were crazy. You're kidding. She was a witch. So what? I think she would have been pretty damn cool. I've been out here in the meadow dozens of times, and nobody's ever tried to hurt me. Now come on, are you game or not? I'm coming, Bethany grumbled quietly. They walked in silence for a while, and then Joe veered into a patch of briars. They crept through the brambles, shaking off the fat eight-legged orb weavers that built their webs all through the tangle. Joe jumped as one of the striped spiders crawled down his shirt. Bethany laughed as he brushed it off, and as her laughter echoed in the twilight, high and clear. He reached for her hand. She gave it to him, and they went on. The shadows of the approaching evening closed in as they came to a clearing in the center of the bramble patch. Bethany caught her breath. The wind had risen, whipping the ferns growing under the tall oaks. In the center of the clearing stood the ruins of Riva's house. Stone blocks were all that remained, a foundation with stairs leading into blackness below ground. In front of the house stood a young sapling. It was a silver willow. Silver as the moonlight. Silver as the tea tray in the china hutch. Silver! With silver leaves it grew. Even with the rushing wind, its leaves were still and steady. Bethany took a step towards it, then jumped back. She turned to Joe. How long has it been here? He shook his head. It wasn't here last week. I come here a lot. The day before the Devil's Wind, I was up here poking around. It wasn't here then. 2 days ago, I came up here and found it. What do you do up here? Bethany sidled closer to the tree. Think mostly. What do you suppose it is? Bethany took another step forward, then another. She squinted at the leaves. I don't know. She reached out one hand, stopping as Joe cried out, Don't! We don't know if it's safe. How can something so beautiful hurt you? She reached out again and laid a gentle finger on one silver leaf. A shadow of a big cat streaked by as the wind howled, and just like that, Bethany was gone. Bethany! Joe stared at the empty space beside the tree. Bethany? The wind died as swiftly as it had risen, and as he watched, Joe saw the silver sapling grow into a young tree. There was a face in the bark, formed of the cracks and knots and gnarls. The face seemed familiar, and when Joe looked at it, Bethany smiled at him. He turned and ran like the Devil's Wind was at his back. Next week, you will get part 2 of the story, the second half of it. I hope you enjoyed that. Have a wonderful day. Just a little story time with Yasmine. Take care. Bye-bye.